Can a debt, incurred generations ago, refuse to stay buried, demanding payment not in coin but in blood and fire? Can the very fabric of American history, specifically the unhealed wounds of its most brutal conflict, manifest as a tangible, lethal force in the present day? We live in an age that champions logic and demands empirical evidence, an era that seeks to dissect every anomaly and silence every unsettling whisper. Yet there are forgotten corners, deep within the hidden heart of this nation, where such certainties dissolve into dust. Here, the past is not merely a chronicle of events. It is a persistent, malevolent entity, a history so profoundly etched into the land itself that it inexorably demands its gruesome payment. This is Havenwood Valley, a name whispered with a mix of dread and resignation among the few who even know of its existence. Tucked away in a remote, almost unreachable pocket of the American South, it stands as a testament to time's indifference, a place not merely forgotten, but seemingly abandoned by the modern world. Here, the air hangs heavy, not just with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, but with something far more unsettling, the phantom tang of old smoke, a constant chilling reminder of past infernos and tragedies best left to memory. The sun, a rare and unwelcome visitor, struggles to pierce the dense, ancient canopy of trees that stand as silent, monolithic sentinels guarding the valley's perimeter. Perpetual twilight casts an eerie, melancholic pallor over crumbling stone walls, over the skeletal remains of forgotten homesteads, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at fields where life once thrived, but now yield only a tangled wilderness of weeds and an unsettling, profound stillness. The only sound that truly belongs to Havenwood, that penetrates its unnatural quiet, is the distant, mournful clang of an iron bell. It is a sound so ancient, so steeped in sorrow, that it seems to vibrate not just through the air, but deep within the very bones of any who hear it. Locals, their voices hushed, whisper that it tolls only when the reign of fire is near, an ancient warning echoing through a land where history stubbornly refuses to lie buried. For generations, the Johnson family has been inextricably bound to this valley and to the sinister legacy that defines it. Their story, meticulously pieced together through faded family Bibles, cryptic journal entries, local coroner reports often filed under unexplained phenomena, and the bewildered testimonies of the rare outsiders who have encountered its horror, is not some rural myth spun around a crackling fire. This is a terrifying, verifiable chronicle of deaths, sudden and violent, occurring exclusively during what the valley's inhabitants have, for over a century, called the Reign of Fire. Imagine, if you can, a sky that suddenly darkens, not with the promise of rain, but with an inexplicable, horrifying shower of ash and embers, falling from an unseen, impossible conflagration. It is during these unholy, unpredictable visitations that members of the Johnson line meet their end, often consumed by flames that defy all conventional explanation, their bodies left scorched, their homes reduced to smoldering ruin, with no discernible source for the inferno. This is not a random pattern of misfortune, nor is it the product of some isolated natural disaster. This is a targeted generational curse, striking with chilling, almost intelligent precision, always claiming a Johnson, always during the Reign of Fire. Scientific inquiry, though severely hampered by the valley's inherent isolation, the Johnsons' deep-seated reclusiveness and the sheer impossibility of the events, has yielded nothing but dead ends. No seismic activity has been detected, no unusual atmospheric conditions precede the phenomenon, no identifiable combustion source has ever been found. The evidence, stark and irrefutable, points only to the impossible, an inexplicable recurring act of fiery vengeance, a malevolence born of a specific time and place. What could possibly bind a family to such a horrific destiny? What could compel the very elements to become an instrument of such precise, unholy retribution? The true horror of the Johnsons' plight lies not in some ethereal, unknowable cosmic entity, but in the very fabric of American history itself. Their torment is a terrestrial burden, a localized curse born from desperation, from betrayal, from a broken oath tied to hidden caches of Confederate gold, a dark secret forged in the crucible of the American Civil War. During those agonizing days, when the nation tore itself asunder, a desperate, unforgivable act was committed in this very valley, a secret pact made, binding future generations to a gruesome, fiery fate. This silent, creeping dread has defined the Johnson family for over a century, forcing them into a solitary existence, always anticipating the next inevitable visitation of the rain of fire. Each new birth in the Johnson line is not a celebration, but a quiet, fragile hope, tinged with the grim knowledge that another target has been presented. Each sudden darkening of the sky, each faint scent of phantom smoke, is not a weather event, but a dire harbinger of unspeakable terror. They are not victims of an abstract cosmic evil, but inheritors of a very human sin, a historical debt that now, in our present day, demands its gruesome payment, erasing their lineage, one fiery demise at a time. For over 100 years, a fragile truce existed with this grim inheritance, a quiet, almost fatalistic acceptance of the inevitable, but that truce shattered, irrevocably, recently. It shattered with the harrowing near-fatal incident that befell 13-year-old Thomas, the youngest grandson of the Johnson matriarch, Eleanor. It wasn't the full, devastating rain of fire yet, merely a terrifying prelude. A sudden, localized shower of ash and embers fell from a seemingly clear sky, scorching the earth around Thomas as he played near the edge of the woods. He suffered inexplicable searing burns across his body, miraculously surviving, but irrevocably marked by the malevolent force that has stalked his family for generations. Witnessing his son's inexplicable injuries, seeing the escalating pattern of bizarre deaths that had defined his family for so long, Eleanor's estranged son, Robert, a skeptical historian by profession, was forced to return to Havenwood. The academic, the man of logic and reason, found himself confronted by the undeniable, by a horror that defied every rational explanation he had ever known. It was this moment, this singular, terrifying event, that compelled the Johnson family for the first time in over a century of silence and suffering to finally reach out for external help, to break their stoic reclusiveness, and to initiate the meticulous documentation of their cursed lineage, thereby opening their lives and their nightmare to the scrutiny of the outside world. Their struggle is a desperate fight for survival, a race against time, not against some mythical creature, but against the inexorable, terrifying pull of their own bloodline and the forgotten sins of their ancestors. Their core conflict, the very essence of their desperate endeavor, is to uncover the exact nature of the original transgression, to locate the lost, hidden components of that broken pact, and to somehow find a way to sever the generational ties to a curse that manifests as a fiery, unexplainable death. It's a desperate plea to redeem a past that refuses to let them live in peace, a forgotten history that now threatens to consume their entire lineage. The narrative we are about to explore unfolds with a dark, investigative precision, each revelation a melancholic echo from a time of national strife. The language we will use, the very atmosphere we will immerse ourselves in, is heavy with the weight of historical tragedy, painting a portrait of a family haunted not by ghosts, but by the very fabric of American history itself. The past in Havenwood Valley is not merely remembered. It is an active, relentless force manifesting as fiery vengeance, a constant burning reminder that some debts are never truly paid, only deferred until the curse finally catches up. Can the Johnson family outrun a legacy steeped in fire and betrayal, or are they forever destined to be consumed by the very history they unknowingly carry, condemned by a past that refuses to die, a past that burns? Dr. Aris Thorne, a figure of quiet intensity and formidable intellect, stood as a bulwark against the tide of sensationalism that so often engulfed tales of the inexplicable. His academic sanctuary, an office overflowing with bound journals and meticulously categorized archival boxes within the venerable halls of the University of Virginia, was more a command center for scientific inquiry than a scholar's retreat. Thorne was no casual dabbler in the strange. He was a cultural anthropologist whose career had been singularly devoted to the painstaking deconstruction of historical anomalies, regional belief systems, and the profound, often tragic interplay between environmental forces and human communities across the American landscape. His reputation was not built on validating the paranormal, but on systematically dismantling it. Thorne specialized in what he termed historical ecology of belief, a discipline that sought to uncover the tangible scientific underpinnings of enduring folklore. His monographs on Appalachian fire spirits, revealed through exhaustive geological and meteorological data to be localized methane vents or peculiar atmospheric inversions interacting with historical industrial pollution, were standard texts in the field. His groundbreaking work on phantom cavalry charges, heard in forgotten Civil War battlefields, meticulously correlated sound propagation physics with localized wind patterns and the residual acoustics of geological strata, effectively explaining away the spectral, without diminishing the historical weight of the original events. For Thorne, every ghost story was merely an unsolved scientific equation, every curse a yet-to-be-identified environmental or socio-historical stressor. He approached each case with a rigorous empiricism, his mind a finely honed instrument, calibrated to dissect narrative, discard conjecture, and distill truth from the sediment of time and collective memory. The initial outreach from Robert Johnson, a series of increasingly desperate voicemails and emails detailing a family curse, fires raining from the sky, and inexplicable deaths, was met with Thorne's characteristic, unyielding skepticism. He had heard countless variations of such pleas. Most often, they were the cries of individuals struggling with psychological distress, economic hardship, or misinterpretations of mundane natural phenomena. Thorne's standard protocol involved polite referrals to local meteorological services, geological surveys, or more often mental health professionals. He saw his role as a clarifier, a bringer of scientific light to shadows cast by ignorance or trauma. What compelled Thorne to deviate from this protocol, to set aside his well-honed professional detachment, was not Robert's emotional appeal, but the cold, hard data Robert had meticulously, almost obsessively, collected. The documents arrived in a thick, unassuming manila envelope. Certified medical reports detailing the unprecedented third-degree flash burns on 13-year-old Thomas Johnson, burns that forensic pathologists could not reconcile with any known cause, given the reported meteorological conditions of a localized light rain shower. There were the authenticated copies of century-old newspaper clippings, carefully preserved and annotated by the Johnson family, describing similar geographically constrained incidents of fiery rain and accompanying deaths, often occurring during periods of anomalous atmospheric pressure and unseasonal temperature spikes. Most critically, Robert included the preliminary results from a private geological survey he'd commissioned. The reports detailed highly unusual concentrations of rare earth elements within the topsoil of the Havenwood Valley, alongside inexplicable, localized electromagnetic field fluctuations of significant magnitude, anomalies that defied all conventional geological models for the region. There were also spectral analyses indicating the presence of unique, high-temperature mineralogical signatures in the soil, suggesting past thermal events of extreme intensity, not attributable to natural wildfires or historical controlled burns. These were not anecdotes, they were empirical observations, physically measurable deviations from expected norms. For Thorne, the notion of a blood pact or a curse remained firmly in the realm of folklore. But the data, the recurring patterns of inexplicable physical trauma, the persistent atmospheric and telluric anomalies, the sheer geographical specificity of the phenomena across generations, these elements constituted a legitimate scientific enigma. This wasn't a family delusion. It was an observable, reproducible deviation from established natural laws, a localized physical constant that demanded rigorous scientific inquiry. His skepticism, far from being a barrier, became his most potent investigative tool. If the Johnsons' fiery torment wasn't supernatural, then its persistent, violent manifestations suggested a scientific explanation far more intricate and perhaps infinitely more terrifying than any ancient oath. It hinted at an unknown, possibly localized geophysics, or an extraordinary yet undiscovered natural process that mocked conventional understanding. Dr. Thorne's subsequent engagement was methodical, almost clinical in its precision. His research protocol would begin with an exhaustive, forensic deep dive into every conceivable archival record pertaining to Havenwood Valley. This included not just typical land deeds and census data, but obscure Confederate military registers, records of pre-Civil War mining operations, forgotten industrial patents, and even dispatches from early geological and topographical surveys of the American South. He intended to cross-reference every reported rain of fire incident with historical meteorological charts, seismic activity logs, and even astronomical event records, leaving no stone unturned in his relentless quest for empirical correlation. On site, his methodology would be equally rigorous. He planned extensive environmental testing, precise soil composition analyses to map the anomalous mineral deposits, atmospheric sampling for unique gaseous or particulate signatures during specific weather conditions, high-resolution electromagnetic field measurements, ground-penetrating radar surveys for subsurface anomalies, and even bioassays of local flora and fauna for unusual chemical absorption. He would deploy specialized thermal imaging drones and atmospheric LiDAR to capture real-time data during any future rain of fire events, seeking to quantify and characterize the elusive phenomenon. Interviews with the Johnson family, particularly the stoic matriarch Eleanor and the traumatized Thomas, would be conducted with a detached yet empathetic professionalism. Their testimonies, no matter how steeped in generational lore, would be treated as crucial qualitative data points, cross-referenced against historical facts, scientific findings, and the consistent patterns he aimed to uncover. Thorne sought quantifiable patterns, not merely captivating narratives. He aimed to construct a comprehensive, meticulously documented case study, to peel back layers of generational belief, to expose the bedrock of scientific reality, however unsettling that reality might prove to be. He understood the profound human tragedy underpinning the Johnson saga, not as a mystical burden, but as an agonizing psychological and physical ordeal. His mission was to bring the unassailable rigor of scientific understanding to bear on a phenomenon that had, for too long, resided in the shadows of superstition and fear. His goal was not to validate a curse, but to unravel a persistent, deadly enigma, to identify the true physical mechanism behind the Johnsons' fiery demise. If a pattern existed, a scientific, rational explanation must exist. The question that now consumed Dr. Thorne was whether he possessed the intellectual capacity and the investigative tools to uncover it, and whether the Johnsons' grim history would allow the truth to be found before it consumed their entire lineage. Preparations were meticulously made, bespoke equipment calibrated, a small team of trusted research assistants briefed on the classified nature of the expedition, and the long, solitary drive into the forgotten heart of Havenwood Valley scheduled. Dr. Harris Thorne was not seeking a ghost story. He was seeking a verifiable, tangible threat, a scientific puzzle that now held an entire family's fate in its fiery grip. The quiet desperation of the Johnson family, once a private agony, finally fractured under the weight of Thomas's inexplicable burns. Eleanor, the matriarch, though steeped in generations of guarded silence, understood that the latest visitation of the rain of fire was different. Its touch had moved beyond the old ones, targeting the innocent. It was Robert, the son who had long fled Havenwood's suffocating embrace, who made the first desperate move to pierce the family's protective shroud. Robert Johnson was a historian by trade, a man who sought truth in dusty archives and forgotten texts. He possessed a scholar's skepticism, a natural aversion to the supernatural. His academic pursuits had always grounded him in the tangible, the provable. Yet, the sight of his son, bandaged and bewildered, marked by an impossible fire that fell from a clear sky, shattered his intellectual defenses. Robert knew, with chilling certainty, that this was no ordinary accident, no common brush fire. He had witnessed the localized, almost surgical precision of the phenomena. His first thought was to find someone who dealt in the fringes of the explainable, a mind both academically rigorous and open to anomalies. He turned to Dr. Harris Thorne, a distinguished professor of historical geography at a prominent East Coast university. Dr. Thorne had built a career on studying forgotten environmental disasters, localized atmospheric curiosities, and the often overlooked intersections of natural phenomena with specific human settlements. His published works delved into everything from inexplicable seismic events in rural Appalachia to localized weather patterns linked to historical industrial practices. Robert had once heard Thorne lecture on pyrocumulus events and rare instances of atmospheric ignition, subjects that now resonated with an unsettling new clarity. Robert's initial email to Dr. Thorne was concise, almost clinically detached, a historian presenting a peculiar dataset. He detailed the Johnson family's oral history of the Rain of Fire events, providing the exact dates and accounts of the deaths as best he could recall from family lore. He included photographs of Thomas's burns and a few hazy, decades-old images of scorched earth near the Johnson homestead after previous incidents. He avoided any mention of curses or blood pacts, framing the phenomena as an extremely rare, localized environmental anomaly, possibly meteorological or geological in origin, with an unusually precise historical recurrence. He emphasized the severe, unexplained thermal injuries. Dr. Thorne, accustomed to receiving inquiries ranging from crackpot theories to legitimate, if obscure, historical puzzles, initially viewed Robert's email with a degree of academic caution. The phrase "rain of fire" immediately triggered a mental flag. It sounded more like folklore than empirical observation. Yet the attached images of Thomas's burns were undeniably severe, and Robert's detailed historical timeline of prior incidents, though lacking scientific specifics, possessed a disturbing consistency. The precise, localized nature of the alleged events, occurring in a specific geographical pocket, hinted at something beyond mere coincidence. Thorne's preliminary assessment, communicated via a meticulously worded reply, was cautious but intrigued. He proposed several initial hypotheses, all rooted in known scientific principles. He suggested the possibility of highly unusual, localized atmospheric conditions, perhaps a rare confluence of high-altitude electrical discharges interacting with specific airborne particulates, or even microscopic meteoroids entering the atmosphere and igniting. He cited historical accounts of red rain and other anomalous precipitations, attempting to find a logical framework for the ash and embers description. He specifically inquired about the geological makeup of Havenwood Valley, postulating the potential for localized gas pockets or mineral deposits that could contribute to atmospheric ionization or spontaneous combustion under certain conditions. He recommended that Robert gather more specific data, detailed meteorological readings from the nearest weather stations for the dates of the incidents, soil samples from affected areas, and any eyewitness accounts that could provide more empirical detail about the exact nature of the fire, its temperature, duration, and spread. He also suggested a full medical assessment of Thomas's burns, looking for any unusual chemical residues. It was a slow, deliberate process, typical of academic investigation. Robert, back in Havenwood, found himself acting as an amateur field researcher, collecting samples and interviewing reluctant family members. He presented Thorne's scientific theories to Eleanor and the few surviving Johnsons, who listened with a mix of weary resignation and faint, almost forgotten hope. They had lived with their secret for so long, and the notion of an outsider, a professor attempting to explain their generational torment with diagrams of atmospheric pressure and geological strata, seemed both preposterous and perhaps mercifully simple. But Robert pressed on, driven by Thomas's recovery and the desperate need to break the cycle. He dispatched the collected samples and data to Dr. Thorne's lab. The package contained vials of blackened soil, a small charred branch from the edge of the property where the last incident occurred, and a meticulously compiled timeline of Johnson family deaths, cross-referenced with local historical records and newspaper clippings that sometimes vaguely alluded to peculiar summer storms or unexplained farm fires in the Havenwood area. Dr. Thorne received the package weeks later. His initial laboratory analysis of the soil samples yielded inconclusive but perplexing results. Unusually high concentrations of certain trace minerals, alongside microscopic carbonized particles that defied easy classification as ordinary soot. The charred wood showed signs of extremely rapid, high-temperature combustion, inconsistent with a typical wildfire. The meteorological data Robert provided, while sparse for such a remote region, showed no extraordinary weather events correlating with the rain of fire dates, only localized, inexplicable spikes in temperature and pressure readings reported by a long-defunct privately owned weather station near Havenwood. It was the timeline of deaths that truly began to shift Thorne's perspective from mere scientific curiosity to a deeper, more unsettling professional interest. The pattern was undeniable, too precise to be random. A death every generation, always during the reign of fire, always affecting a direct descendant. The academic in him bristled at the implication of causality, but the sheer statistical improbability demanded further scrutiny. He knew then that Havenwood Valley was more than just a site of an unusual environmental phenomenon. It was a place holding a very specific, very localized historical wound that manifested in ways science struggled to comprehend. The initial problem, once seemingly practical and explainable, was slowly, unnervingly, beginning to reveal its true, horrifying depth. The heavy silence of Havenwood Valley was a burden Robert Johnson had always sought to escape. His return, spurred by the incomprehensible incident involving young Thomas, felt less like a homecoming and more like an academic expedition into a forgotten corner of the past. As a seasoned historian, his instinct was to dissect, to contextualize, to reduce the seemingly supernatural to explainable human folly or natural phenomena. Eleanor's accounts of the reign of fire were, to his trained mind, local superstition, a generational coping mechanism for unexplainable tragedy. Yet, the distinct, almost surgical burns on Thomas's skin, appearing after a localized downpour of ash and embers in a sky clear save for distant storm clouds, defied immediate medical or meteorological explanation. This anomaly, deeply personal and jarringly physical, compelled him to dig deeper than he ever intended, to look beyond the veil of folklore that had long protected his family's grim legacy. His initial investigation began not with spectral whispers, but with tangible earth and forgotten records. Robert approached the scarred patch of ground where Thomas had fallen, not as a desperate father, but as a forensic historian. He knelt, the damp southern earth cool beneath his fingers, studying the unusual compaction of the soil, almost vitrified in places despite the recent rain. He collected samples into sterile bags, noting the peculiar density of the ash, darker and coarser than typical wood ash, with an almost metallic, crystalline glint. It scattered oddly, adhering to his gloves with an uncharacteristic stickiness, unlike anything he had encountered in his extensive studies of historical conflagrations. The scorch marks on the surrounding foliage, too, were peculiar, crisp, uniform edges, as if subjected to intense, momentary heat, rather than a sustained blaze. He found no evidence of accelerants, no signs of a ground fire, no lingering scent of smoke, nothing that suggested a conventional ignition source. It was as if concentrated heat had simply materialized from above, precise and inexplicable, impacting only a defined radius. Robert extended his meticulous inquiry to the Johnson family property itself, a sprawling, dilapidated homestead that spoke of centuries of habitation and decay. He systematically photographed the interior of the main house, room by room, focusing on the surprising state of old family Bibles and ledgers. Their brittle pages, some dating back to the mid-19th century, seemed remarkably preserved, untouched by the passage of time or the numerous rain of fire incidents Eleanor had vaguely alluded to. This pristine preservation stood in stark contrast to the exterior, which bore the undeniable scars of countless repairs, patchwork additions of disparate lumber, and inexplicable charring on certain ancient beams, often meticulously covered over with fresh paint, yet still discernible to his trained eye. The inconsistency gnawed at him. How could a violent, fiery phenomenon selectively damage robust structural elements while leaving fragile paper artifacts, often in close proximity, completely unharmed? It defied physics and logic. His next step led him to the sparse, neglected county archives, housed in a stifling, mildewed room above the Justice of the Peace Office. Havenwood's official records were a testament to its isolation, incomplete, poorly preserved, and often maddeningly contradictory. Robert, however, possessed a historian's tenacity, a unique ability to find patterns in fragmented data, to coax secrets from fading ink. He spent days immersed, cross-referencing local newspaper clippings, land deeds, probate records, and fragmented old census reports. The breakthrough, subtle yet profoundly unsettling, came not from a direct mention of the reign of fire, but from an anachronism in the historical accounts of property ownership immediately surrounding the Johnson family land. Several deeds from the immediate post-Civil War era detailed rapid, almost frantic sales and resales of adjacent parcels, often for prices that defied the devastated economy of the Reconstruction South. The transactions seemed to imply a strange urgency, a desperate need for liquidity that didn't align with the general economic stagnation. Moreover, references to significant unexplained fires in the region in the late 1860s and early 1870s appeared with unusual frequency in these dusty records. These incidents were often vaguely attributed to squatters or outlaws, but the language used in the old reports carried a distinct undercurrent of official bewilderment, an inability to properly categorize the events. One particular county clerk's ledger from 1868, its pages brittle and foxed, described an incident near the Johnson property as a singular discharge of burning matter from the sky, causing great consternation and loss of livestock, yet no discernible smoke source. This was not natural fire, this was something else entirely. Robert began piecing together a nascent theory. The Johnson family's original acquisition of this land, during the lean years following the war, seemed almost too fortuitous, too strategically well-timed. He found fragmented, almost hushed references to a war treasury or Confederate remnants in the area, often dismissed by academic peers as mere folklore or embellished accounts of desperate partisans. But the pattern of property transactions, coupled with the inexplicable fires, now suggested something far more concrete than myth. He discovered an obscure handwritten marginalia in a surveyor's journal from 1872, detailing an unusual deposit of vitrified earth on what was then nascent Johnson land, along with a cryptic note about local reports of unusual luminescence after thunderstorms. The surveyor, clearly unnerved, dismissed it as swamp gas or ignis fatuus, but Robert, now armed with the tangible evidence of anomalous burns and the bizarre ash samples from Thomas's incident, felt a chilling recognition. This wasn't merely coincidence, not just superstition. The scattered historical fragments, once disparate and ignorable, were beginning to align with the physical evidence, forming a shadowy outline of something deeply disturbing beneath the veneer of Havenwood's quiet decay. The past in this remote valley was not simply remembered. It was actively, violently asserting its presence, and it was just beginning to reveal its true fiery nature, threatening to consume them all. Robert Johnson, the historian who had long dismissed his family's folklore as the products of an isolated imagination, now found himself relentlessly sifting through the physical detritus of their forgotten lineage. His skepticism, once a formidable shield, had been irrevocably shattered by the sight of Thomas's burns, a scorching testament to a reality he could no longer deny. The Johnson home, a repository of generations of accumulated sorrow and neglect, became his reluctant archive. Dust-laden attics, damp cellars, and the forgotten recesses of century-old furniture yielded little initially beyond faded photographs and brittle letters detailing mundane concerns. The search was methodical, almost archaeological, a desperate excavation not for artifacts but for truth. The Havenwood Valley itself offered few public records that could shed light on such a localized, hidden tragedy. County archives were sparse, church records incomplete, a testament to the community's historical insularity. Robert understood that the nature of the pact, if it existed, would not be openly recorded. It would be buried, concealed, a secret meant to die with its creators. His focus shifted to the objects closest to the original ancestors, the personal effects that might hold a hidden key. Eleanor, with her weary wisdom, directed him to a small, unassuming writing desk in the master bedroom, a piece of furniture that had belonged to Jedediah Johnson, the family patriarch from the mid-19th century. Its dark wood, scarred by time and neglect, offered no immediate clues. For days Robert meticulously examined the desk, its drawers groaning open with the weight of forgotten papers and dried inkwells. He ran his fingers over every surface, tested every joint, recalling lessons from years spent researching historical artifacts. It was the bottom right drawer, seemingly shallower than the others, that finally yielded a subtle anomaly. A faint seam, almost imperceptible against the grain of the aged wood, hinted at a false bottom. With a historian's patience and a son's growing urgency, Robert worked a thin blade into the seam, the wood protesting with a low creak that echoed unnaturally in the quiet room. The false bottom lifted, revealing a shallow compartment, long hidden from view, untouched by the passage of time or the casual glance of its inheritors. Within the concealed space lay not gold, but something far more potent, a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth, its pages brittle with age, secured by a rusted clasp. Its title, crudely etched into the leather, read simply, The Account of Jedediah Johnson, 1864. Beneath it, scratched deeper, was a single chilling word, payment. The journal was not merely a record, it was a confession, a testament, a curse. Its scent, a mix of old paper, mildew, and something akin to a faint metallic tang, seemed to carry the very weight of the valley's hidden grief. Robert handled the journal with the reverence due to a sacred, terrible text. Its pages, fragile and yellowed, were filled with a hurried, almost panicked script. The entries detailed the final, desperate days of the Confederacy's retreat through Havenwood Valley in the spring of 1864. Jedediah, a local farmer, had been a reluctant participant in a scheme orchestrated by a retreating Confederate officer, Captain Elias Thorne, to hide a substantial cache of gold from Union forces. The journal vividly described the gold, salvaged from a desperate supply train being buried deep within the earth on Johnson land, meant to be retrieved after the war, a nest egg for the cause. The entries then shifted, growing darker. Jedediah wrote of starvation, desperation, and the growing fear of losing his family to the war's ravages. He confessed to a horrifying betrayal. Faced with a choice between loyalty to a crumbling cause and the survival of his kin, Jedediah broke the oath he had sworn with Captain Thorne. Instead of protecting the gold for the Confederacy, he used its existence to strike a bargain with a passing Union scout, trading the intelligence of the gold's location for his family's safety, and, more crucially, for a promise of protection from subsequent Confederate reprisals. He had led the Union soldiers directly to the hidden cache, revealing its whereabouts in exchange for a signed document from a Union colonel, guaranteeing immunity for the Johnson family in the valley, a safeguard against future conflict. The journal described the immediate aftermath, the Union soldiers digging up the gold, the swift, silent departure of Thorne's retreating men, and the chilling, whispered curse Jedediah overheard from one of Thorne's most loyal sergeants as they rode away. "You have bought your lives with fire, Johnson, but fire claims its own. This gold will burn your lineage until no ash remains." The final entries were a descent into terror, Jedediah recounting strange, localized fires, inexplicable illnesses, and the sudden fiery deaths of his immediate family members, all occurring during intense, localized downpours that matched the descriptions of the rain of fire. He believed the curse was real, tied to the broken oath and the violated sanctity of the hidden gold. He had documented the deaths, the dates, the circumstances, seeing a pattern where others saw only tragic accidents. He had recorded the attempts to appease, the desperate prayers, the fear that this payment would extend beyond his own lifespan. Robert read through the chilling account, his academic detachment giving way to a visceral horror. The elegant, almost clinical tone of the documented case he envisioned was overwhelmed by the raw, desperate fear embedded in Jedediah's confessions. This was not merely a historical account, it was the genesis of his family's nightmare, a meticulously recorded ledger of sin and consequence. The journal was more than a discovery, it was a revelation, providing the long-sought answers to the origins of the curse. It provided names, dates, and the precise nature of the transgression. The hidden gold, the broken pact, the fiery payment, it was all laid bare in the trembling hand of an ancestor who had dared to survive at a terrible price. The past, so long a vague shadow, had finally revealed its burning, precise form. The quiet of Havenwood Valley, a stillness usually born of deep rural isolation, had transformed into an oppressive silence in the days leading up to what Eleanor Johnson simply called the time of reckoning. Robert, his academic skepticism yielding incrementally to an undeniable sense of dread, had positioned a small team of researchers from a regional university, ostensibly to document the family's unique oral histories and the ecological peculiarities of the valley. In truth, their sophisticated meteorological equipment and thermal sensors were now aimed squarely at detecting the very phenomenon that Eleanor and her kin had resigned themselves to for generations. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and an underlying hint of ozone, seemed to hum with an anticipation that bypassed human senses, registering instead on the quivering needles of their instruments. Then it began, not with a crack of thunder or a sudden downpour, but with the distant mournful clang of the solitary bell. It was not a rhythmic peal but a single resonant strike. Then another, then a slow, deliberate cadence that seemed to vibrate not just through the valley air, but through the very bones of anyone present. Eleanor, her face etched with a grim acceptance, watched from the porch, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky, which remained devoid of rain clouds. Robert, reviewing his rapidly spiking sensor readings, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The bell's ancient bronze resonance, though faint, carried with it the weight of every loss that had plagued the family for over a century, a warning echoing through a land where history refused to lie buried. The initial manifestation was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, a shimmering distortion in the air above the Johnson homestead, like heat haze on a summer road, but with no discernible source. Then, the localized heat began, not from the sun, but from above, an invisible hand turning up an immense unseen furnace. The leaves on the ancient oak outside the house began to curl and brown at an alarming rate, not drying out, but visibly scorching. The research team's thermal imaging cameras, moments before displaying normal ambient temperatures, suddenly flared with impossible readings, localized hotspots appearing and vanishing with erratic speed. One researcher, a young climatologist named Dr. Evelyn Reed, gasped as her handheld device, gripped firmly in her gloved hand, suddenly became too hot to touch, its plastic casing bubbling and deforming before she dropped it to the parched earth, where it continued to smolder. Within minutes, the subtle became overt, and the inexplicable became terrifying. Small, localized pockets of fire erupted without fuel or ignition source. A patch of dried grass near the garden shed spontaneously combusted, burning fiercely for seconds, before extinguishing itself as abruptly as it had ignited, leaving behind only a circular patch of superheated ash. Then, the true rain of fire descended. It wasn't rain at all, but a shower of incandescent embers and ash, falling in precise, almost deliberate, localized plumes. These were not the gentle, spent flakes from a distant wildfire, but glowing fragments of something impossibly hot, falling with an unnerving, silent purpose. The air filled with the acrid scent of burning wood and ozone, a phantom smoke that stung the eyes and caught in the throat. The first casualty of this terrifying visitation was not immediate. Eleanor's cousin, old Silas Johnson, a man whose quiet life was spent tending his modest vegetable patch, had gone out to retrieve a forgotten trowel. He was found moments later, crumpled beside a row of wilting tomatoes, his clothes smoldering, his skin seared with intricate patterns of first and second-degree burns. His eyes, though wide and unseeing, seemed to reflect an agony beyond comprehension. There was no direct flame, no large-scale conflagration, just the focused, insidious heat and glowing embers, as if an invisible torch had passed over him. The horror on Robert's face was palpable, his academic detachment finally shattering into raw fear. He knew then that this was no meteorological anomaly. This was an entity, a force, meticulously paying a long-deferred debt. Panic, cold and visceral, began to set in. Robert attempted to radio for help, to call for medical assistance, but his satellite phone crackled with static, the signal inexplicably dead. The team's vehicles, parked just beyond the property line, refused to start, their engines silent, their batteries registering inexplicable and instantaneous drainage. It was as if Havenwood Valley itself, and specifically the Johnson homestead, had been sealed off, isolated from the outside world by an invisible barrier of malevolent intent. The rain of fire intensified, becoming a relentless, targeted assault. Streaks of fiery ash now descended with greater frequency, seeking out the Johnson family members with terrifying precision. A section of the porch railing, where Eleanor had rested her hand moments before, suddenly ignited, charring the wood to a brittle black. Thomas, still recovering from his previous incident, cried out from inside the house as a localized cascade of embers rained down through a cracked window pane in his room, scorching the floorboards and igniting his bedspread before Eleanor and Robert could rush in and smother the flames with thick blankets. The heat was immense, suffocating, yet oddly selective, sparing other areas of the room even as it consumed the boys' bedding. They were trapped. The outside world, for all its scientific understanding and modern technology, was useless against a force that defied every known law of physics. The Johnsons retreated into the main house, a structure that had stood for generations, but now felt like a fragile timber prison. The smell of smoke and burning flesh permeated the air, a constant reminder of Silas's fate. Every creak of the ancient house, every gust of wind rattling the loose panes, became a harbinger of doom. The rain of fire was not a storm. It was a targeted purge, an unexplainable, relentless manifestation of a historical grievance. It sought to erase their lineage, one fiery demise at a time, proving that some debts, forged in the crucible of a nation's deepest wounds, could not be outrun, only paid in blood and ash. The unholy fire danced outside, threatening to consume them all, a chilling testament to the enduring power of forgotten sins. The air in Havenwood Valley had grown impossibly still, the usual hum of cicadas replaced by a profound, echoing silence. Even the wind, a constant presence, seemed to hold its breath. It was a silence Eleanor knew too well, a premonition that chilled her to the bone. The single distant bell, normally muted by the vastness of the valley, now tolled with a sharper, more urgent resonance, its metal tongue striking a hollow, mournful beat that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. The Johnsons stood in their ancient, dust-choked living room, the flickering gaslight casting long, dancing shadows, as Robert, his face etched with exhaustion and grim determination, laid out his findings on a worn mahogany table. "It wasn't just about the gold," Robert began, his voice a low, gravelly drone. "Not solely about the hidden Confederate fortune that my great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Johnson, and his cohort, Captain Silas Thorne, conspired to pilfer from the retreating Union forces. That was the surface betrayal. The true horror lies in the how." He pushed forward a brittle, yellowed map, its creases deep as old wounds. "This isn't just a map of the gold's burial site. This is a deed of blood, a binding oath sworn over this very land here in Havenwood. Thorne, a man deeply steeped in arcane Masonic rituals, a branch of it at least, that twisted old-world practices into something far darker, insisted on a pact." Eleanor gripped the arms of her armchair, her knuckles white. Thomas, huddled close to his mother, stared at the map, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended his young years. "They didn't just hide stolen wealth," Robert continued, his finger tracing a faded symbol on the map. "They bound it to the Johnson bloodline as its perpetual guardians, its inheritors, its stewards. The oath was not just to protect the gold, but to reclaim it, to use it for the Southern cause, to avenge their fallen. It was a promise made to the very earth, sanctified with the blood of their fallen comrades and, implicitly, their own future generations, should they ever betray that trust. Jeremiah betrayed it. He fled, kept his portion, and left Thorne, who was later captured and executed by Union scouts, to bear the full brunt of the perceived defection. The gold remains here, undisturbed, the oath unfulfilled, actively seeking its payment from the very lineage that broke the pact." A faint, acrid smell began to permeate the air, a scent Eleanor recognized with a gut-wrenching dread. Smoke, not from a hearth, but from something distant, unnatural. The solitary bell's tolls grew more frantic, a chaotic, desperate clang. "The rain of fire isn't an act of cosmic malevolence," Robert stated, his voice now imbued with a chilling certainty. "It's the mechanism of that unfulfilled oath. The gold, permeated with the initial sacrifice and the subsequent betrayal, has become a locus of vengeful energy. When the conditions are right, specific atmospheric pressure, localized electromagnetic anomalies, and perhaps even a generational threshold being crossed, the oath activates. It seeks out the nearest bloodkin, demanding its due. The ash and embers, the localized fires, they are not merely symbolic. They are a physical manifestation of that burning oath, consuming the lineage that failed to uphold it." He gestured to an old, tarnished brass locket lying on the table beside the map. "I found this in an old Johnson family Bible, tucked into Jeremiah's personal journal. It was Thorne's. He gave it to Jeremiah as part of the pact, a physical key, a token of their unholy alliance. It contains a small shard of meteorite, supposedly imbued with celestial fire, used in their rituals. The journal speaks of it as a catalyst, capable of both sealing and unsealing the pact. To break the curse, we must return this locket and a specific portion of the gold, the Johnson share, to the precise spot where the original oath was sworn, to a hidden chamber beneath the old Johnson grist mill, at the height of the Reign of Fire. It is a reversal, a symbolic unbinding, a desperate gamble that the ancient forces at play will accept the payment and release their claim." Outside, a low guttural rumble began, a sound that started deep within the earth and vibrated through the floorboards. Thomas whimpered, burying his face in his mother's side. "The grist mill," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's collapsing. The entrance is buried." Robert nodded grimly. "That's why this is our last chance. The signs are clear. This isn't a prelude. This is the main event. Tonight, the Reign of Fire will claim another Johnson unless we act." Suddenly, a shower of fine grey ash began to drift down through the cracks in the ceiling, illuminated by the gaslight. A faint, glowing ember landed on the tabletop, sizzling for a moment before extinguishing. The air grew heavy, almost suffocating, with the metallic tang of burnt earth and something else, something ancient and hungry. The bell outside now rang in a furious, unending peal, a cacophony of warning and despair. "We have to go now," Robert urged, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Thomas, you stay here with your mother. I'll go. I know the way." "No!" Eleanor cried, rising with a sudden, fierce energy. "This curse is ours. It ends with us, together. We face it. We have to." Her eyes, usually clouded with resignation, now burned with a defiant fire. "Thomas, you stay behind us. Robert, lead the way." As they stepped outside, the valley had transformed into a vision of hell. The sky, once a bruised purple, now glowed a sickly orange from an unseen source. Localized, swirling vortices of ash and cinders danced through the fields, igniting dry patches of grass in sudden, furious bursts that died as quickly as they flared. Small, burning rocks, like miniature meteors, hissed down from the heavens, impacting the ground with a soft, sickening thud. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur and ozone, a palpable current of malevolent energy. They ran, bodies bent against the terrifying downpour, towards the crumbling remains of the old grist mill. The solitary bell, now visible in the eerie, fiery light, swayed wildly, its frantic tolling a soundtrack to their desperate, final confrontation. Eleanor clutched the brass locket to her chest, its cold metal burning against her skin. Robert led them to a hidden entrance, half buried by centuries of neglect and sediment. With superhuman effort, fueled by terror and desperation, they cleared enough debris to reveal a narrow, gaping maw. Below, the passage was dark, damp, and smelled of forgotten earth. They descended into the maw of the earth, the rain of fire raging above them. Each descending step took them deeper into the very heart of the curse, towards the forgotten secret of the Johnsons, towards the final terrifying payment for a betrayal born in the crucible of a nation divided, a debt now demanding its gruesome interest. They were not merely seeking a buried treasure, they were attempting to disinter the very roots of their suffering, to sever the ties that bound them to a past that would not rest, to a fire that would not extinguish. The confrontation was not with a spectral entity, but with the raw elemental force of a broken oath, materialized by the very land itself. The quiet that settled over Havenwood Valley after the last desperate act was not peace, but a fragile, brittle silence. The ember showers ceased. The eerie clang of the solitary bell was no longer heard, not even during the most violent storms. Thomas, though deeply scarred, both physically and psychologically, had been spared from the full, consuming inferno that had claimed so many of his kin. He lived, a living testament to the desperate, almost unbearable gamble Eleanor and Robert had taken. The transgression, centuries old, had been unearthed. The missing components of the broken pact, hidden within the very foundations of the original Johnson homestead, were finally brought into the light. A rusted strongbox, containing not gold, but scorched fragments of a handwritten oath and a single blackened fingerbone had been the key. It was a tangible, grotesque piece of the past that solidified the horrifying truth. The rain of fire was no random act of God or nature. It was a contract, violently enforced. The ritual to sever the ties, as pieced together from forgotten family records and fragmented local folklore, was agonizingly precise and deeply personal. It demanded an act of profound self-sacrifice, not of life, but of identity. For the Johnsons, it meant confronting the deepest, most damning secrets of their lineage, acknowledging the betrayal not just to the Confederate cause, but to a deeper, more elemental power they had sought to bargain with. Robert, the academic, had watched as his mother, Eleanor, carried out the final chilling steps, her face a mask of grim determination. He could not fully comprehend the forces at play, only the palpable shift in the air, the release of an ancient, suffocating pressure. Since then, no Johnson has perished in a fiery deluge. The curse, it seems, has been appeased, or perhaps merely transformed. The air in Havenwood still carries a phantom scent of smoke, but it is now a memory, not a warning. The valley remains remote, forgotten, but a new kind of silence has descended upon the Johnson lands. It is a silence born not of dread, but of a profound, exhausting peace. Yet this peace is tinged with a melancholic weight. The family carries the truth of their ancestry, a burden more chilling than any flame. They know what their forefathers did, the lengths to which they went for mere gold, and the centuries of suffering they bequeathed. That knowledge, Robert often mused, was a curse of its own, a cold fire burning within their very souls. Eleanor, her stoic demeanor now softened by a weariness that went beyond her years, spoke little of the events. She simply lived, tending to Thomas, watching him heal, a silent sentinel of their family's enduring survival. Robert, however, could not remain silent. The historian in him demanded documentation, dissemination. The Johnson case, he believed, was not merely an isolated incident of Appalachian strangeness. It was a terrifying illustration of history's enduring grip, a testament to how the echoes of past transgressions can manifest in the most brutal, inexplicable ways. His initial skepticism had been shattered, replaced by a new, chilling understanding. The Civil War, with its hidden caches, its desperate allegiances, and its profound betrayals, had left scars far deeper than any battlefield wound. The Johnsons were not victims of a supernatural entity, but of a very human sin that had brewed and festered for generations until it found its fiery expression. Their story serves as a grim reminder that some debts are never truly paid, only deferred, weaving themselves into the very fabric of families and lands, until they erupt in a final, terrifying reckoning. The Johnson family now lives, not in freedom, but in a state of watchful peace. The reign of fire has ceased its onslaught, yet the memory of its scorching touch and the grim knowledge of its origin will forever define them. They are the inheritors of a terrible truth, a lineage forever marked by the fires of their ancestors past. The curse may be broken, but the shadow it cast, the weight of a history that refused to lie buried, remains. This exploration into the hidden horror of the Johnsons has only scratched the surface of the terrifying truths lurking in America's forgotten corners. We at the Hidden Horror Channel are dedicated to unearthing these profound and often disturbing historical mysteries. If the chilling reality of the Johnsons' century-long ordeal resonated with you, if you found yourself captivated by the dark threads of history and the inexplicable forces they sometimes unleash, then we invite you to join our journey. Subscribe to the Hidden Horror Channel for more in-depth investigations into documented cases of inexplicable phenomena where history, folklore, and the truly terrifying converge. Engage with our community in the comments below, share your own theories, and tell us which hidden horrors you believe deserve our attention next. Unraveling these mysteries is not just about understanding the past, it's about confronting the shadows that still linger in the present. We are here to listen, to investigate, and to bring these unsettling truths to light.